To see you all here bright and early. Great to have such a big group in the audience today. I'm just going to start by saying 24 hours ago, many of us were in the room, this room, and the focus and the theme of this conference is well-being. It's relaxation, and we're now here on Immigration Day, probably the most anxiety and stressful flavor of global mobility. So appreciate you being here. It's going to be a bit of a ride. We've got some great panelists here today, and for my part, I would love to have as much interaction, questions, comments, suggestions from the audience during our panel, but also at the end, and really looking forward to the conversation as much as possible. So do please feel free to contribute and jump in and agree, disagree, and I'd love to have as much interaction as possible. But without further ado, before I dip into the introduction, I do want to introduce my incredible panel today. We have Bobby, we have Natasha, Maruk, and Ben with me, and I'm going to allow them to introduce themselves and a bit about their companies. I work for Centuro Global. I am a client success manager. We're a technology company in the global mobility space. We offer immigration services and also a fantastic suite of technology and AI capabilities. And I'm really looking forward to the discussion. I'll pass it on to Bobby to introduce himself.
Yeah, thank you, Ben. Hello, everybody. I'm Bobby Bartle. I am based in the United States. I work with AIRS. AIRS is a relocation management company, and I oversee our immigration services at AIRS, where we work with many partners like yourselves that are sitting in the room today. And thank you very much for extending the invitation for me to join this panel. So thank you.
My name is Natasha Tasic. I'm Immigration Practice Director at Intermark Relocation. I'm responsible for immigration operations across Central and Eastern Europe at Intermark. For you who do not know, Intermark Relocation is a company that provides relocation, immigration, and moving services for more than 30 years across Central Asia and Eastern Europe. I'm based in Belgrade, Serbia, and I'm grateful to be part of this panel today.
Hi everyone, my name is Maria Kumriga. I'm a partner at Consortia Legal. We're a full-service Indian law firm and only advise on Indian law and jurisdiction. I spend my time between London and Mumbai, and this is my first year and I'm super excited to be here.
Hello everyone, my name is Ben Gebel from Germany. I'm based in Munich. From Visum Point, we are also an immigration relocation provider, but also focus on other services like visa consular services, EU postal workers, and document procurement. Yes, and I'm happy to be here. 14 years now in the industry, but first time on stage here at Euro, so happy to our conversations to be here.
Thanks very much, everyone. Great to have you all part of the discussion today. So the topic we've got to discuss and we're keen to explore today is navigating change in immigration. And one thing that has become inevitable to me in the 15 years I've been working in this industry is that change in life, change in global mobility, change in immigration is an inevitability that we have to confront. It's how we adapt to it and how we adjust to it and how we bring new elements to the industry that will help us be successful and help us thrive and continue to build on this incredible industry that we have. I want to start quickly with a quote that means a great deal to me by an American economist by the name of Milton Friedman. And he said that only a crisis, actual or perceived, produces real change. But when that crisis occurs, the actions that are taken depend on the ideas that are lying around. In my opinion, it's not just the ideas, it's the people, it's the communities, it's associations like Eura that can help us build and help us improve our industry. So we are living in difficult times at the moment. I want to start off with a slide. I know some of you started to put some answers in. The question is, which country's immigration policy has become the most complex for your clients in the past year? I have a feeling we know what the answer might be, but please do take a minute or two to put some answers down. It'd be great to find out what you all think. Not too much of a surprise. And it's a great segue onto Bobby. Bobby, I was going to ask how much change has been in the last 12 months, but I think we'll probably start with, I could say 12 hours, quite frankly, with the US. How much change has there been and what are the adjustments that have taken place in the US since the 20th of January of this year when your country appointed Donald Trump as the President of the United States?
Yeah, so I have until 8 p.m. tonight, right, to keep going. Yeah, I have a couple minutes to discuss this, and yeah, I was not surprised to see that that is the case. You know, in reality, I think it's important to talk about the noise that we've seen and talk about some of the practical aspects of what has been the changes from the U.S. perspective. And quite frankly, we are still in a moment where it's less about what has happened in the last 3.5 months and more so wondering about what is to come. So what is going to happen over the next 12 months? Those are the, I think, interesting challenges that immigration professionals in the United States right now have of trying to answer to the clients that they represent, the employees that they work for, and these are the questions and the challenges that the employees actually have. There is a lot of, I'm not sure what is going to happen. What's going to happen to me when I come to the border? What are the adjudication procedures going to be in the United States going forward? There's a lot of question marks. So what I just want to do really quickly is kind of explain the process from a U.S. perspective, so maybe that allows it to sink in a little bit as to how you can anticipate some of those changes. So in the U.S., we have 3 branches of government in the federal government. Immigration is a federal government regulated process. And so we have the executive branch, we have the legislative branch, and we have the judicial branch. Now, it's our legislative branch. These are our Congress people in the House of Representatives and the Senate that actually make the laws. From a power perspective and the balance in the U.S., we just don't really see major changes coming on the horizon in terms of the legislative branch making comprehensive changes to immigration laws. So what we have seen is we've seen the executive branch, the president, and the president falls under that executive branch, utilizing these things called executive orders. And that's what has really happened over the last 3 months. We've had almost 150 executive orders, about 40 in the first couple days, and those executive orders touch upon areas of immigration, and they are not laws, but they are directing federal agencies as to how to interpret and how to procedurally react to certain immigration procedures. And so those are the elements that we're seeing. I will say that so far, Trump administration 2.0 is focused more on border security, national security when it comes to those executive orders, as opposed to elements of business immigration. I think that is the perception, but it's also worth noting that we have a third branch, as I mentioned, the judicial branch. And so when we see the president initiate those executive orders, we have a legal system, and we see people, lawyers and associations trying to protest those executive actions. And so we have a little bit of, even though there is that executive order capability, sometimes that gets held up in the legal system. So again, stay tuned. I know it's a lot of wait and see. It's a lot of noise. It's a lot of speculation. Open up X and you'll see what the president thinks or says, right? And that will create a lot of turmoil, but it's still a little bit of a wait and see approach. How is that going to impact business immigration?
I've also heard he's was on favourite to be the next pope.
That's what I heard as well. So I don't know what that means from the Vatican with regards to immigration, but stay tuned.
No, thanks very much for that input, Bobby. It's really interesting to see how the US has really been at the core of things globally, as always, really, but influenced other global leaders, and that leads me on to the re-succession or the reappointment of Narendra Modi, who was reappointed in June of last year, I believe. Maruk, perhaps you could give us some insight in terms of what's going on that side of the world in India.
Yeah, sure. So there's the most recent news and what's happened in the 12 months. So I'll kind of cover the 12 months and then speak about what happened and the impact of yesterday. So we have had a new Immigration Act which has been passed in April, the 4th of April, which is the Immigration and Foreigners Act. And the primary focus of this act is to consolidate all the old pre-independence acts to enhance national security, to facilitate movement of people where work is concerned, and also to enforce stricter penalties on violators. So anyone or any companies which have had a risk appetite will have to rethink what they do in terms of categories of visas, assignees going to India, are they going on the right category, are they doing the right work on the right category of visa? The other thing the system has introduced is e-visas for students to kind of facilitate the process, so that the education sector has had a huge overhaul in India. India has started to allow foreign universities to set up campus in India as well. So there is a lot of influx of students coming into India, and instead of applying solely for consular visas for students, you can now also apply for an e-visa through the government portal, where you will get approval from the ministry directly. There have also been a lot of bilateral agreements happening between India. So I'm happy to say that the UK and India finalized a trade agreement yesterday after 3 years of negotiation. There are terms which will indirectly definitely impact immigration. And of course, the better the trade agreement, more movement of people. So I think it will be beneficial both for the UK and India. There are agreements in talks still with the US and Australia as well, and other countries. Now, on the not so happy side, you would have heard that there was a terror attack in India some time back, and there was a retaliation, not just what happened yesterday, but in terms of after the attack, the visas for all Pakistani nationals in India were revoked with immediate effect, and they were asked to leave the country within 48 hours. There have been additional directives that if there are Pakistani nationals living in India on long-term visas, what they call LTVs, they are required now, as of yesterday, this was announced, that they are required to re-register with the local authorities, and they have a deadline of the 10th of July this year. And if they do not register, then they will be removed, deported, and their visas will be cancelled. So, I mean, there are a lot of good things, but there are a lot of strict sanctions, and we are seeing more and more in India that the enforcement part of it, which a lot of people took for granted for many, many years, is now being enforced, as opposed to just being there in theory.
Yeah, and I've spoken to a lot of Indian delegates at the conference in the last couple of days, but it does seem to be like a positive feeling overall. I know that...
Oh, absolutely. From a business immigration perspective, there's been a huge amount of interest in India in terms of inward investment and setup. And as such, obviously, movement of people. So that we've seen a lot of movement of people going into India for training. So companies that have set up want to send their expats from all over the world to train Indian personnel. So training is a huge thing, a huge amount of business visitors, still a lot of people recceing and wanting to set up. So it's been very positive from a business immigration perspective.
It's good to hear. Ben, obviously from Germany. You do not have a chancellor, is that correct? You could maybe tell us a bit more about what's going on over there. It's slightly confusing, even to me, but obviously he was appointed, I believe, in February, but there was some issues in terms of the vote yesterday. Could you maybe update us all?
Yes, first time that this happened in Germany, because of course the new government or the parliament needed to vote in the chancellor, and then in the first round it didn't work out. Yes, like 6 votes were missing. Of course, no one knows who voted or who voted against him, because it's like a silent vote, of course. But now he has appointed, so it has been done. So
He is the chancellor.
he's now the chancellor, like officially,
Great.
which is great news. So this is done. But of course, now we are facing issues, of course, in Germany. And we need to give him also time. Like the 100 days of Mr. Trump. So let's see what the first 100 days will bring. But in terms of migration, I don't expect major changes regarding the talent migration to have skilled workers. But there will be the changes on more the illegal immigration. So that will be a bit more aggressive and strict in Germany than it was like in the last few years. But no major changes, at least I hope so, because of course Germany needs foreign workers. We have a huge talent gap, and let's see what this will bring the next few
Interesting. It seems there's a bit of alignment between the US and Germany. It's important to be clear to the audience, it's not just anti-immigration. In fact, in terms of high-skilled immigration, there seems to be positivity and support for that. Would you say that's the same in the US, Bobby, as well? And
Yeah, so as I mentioned, the difference I think in Trump 2.0 versus the previous administration efforts were that there is not as much talk or rhetoric around in disrupting the highly skilled business immigration piece. And obviously, if you followed the campaign process or the first 100 days, a real big influence of the Trump administration has been Elon Musk, Vivek Ramaswamy, and even Trump himself during the campaigning process made some comments that were pretty a little bit reassuring as appreciating the need for the high-skilled immigration process, and he even has said similar comments and conversations that he's had as he announced the Trump Gold Card and the importance of, hey, maybe we know that the companies could utilize this now. Whether that's a pathway or not, but it's sending signals that there might not be a target on business immigration.
Interesting.
And high-skilled immigration.
And that's similar for Germany as well, don't you say?
Yeah, definitely.
Cool. Well, we do need to say something positive today. So Natasha covers over 20 countries in Eastern Europe. But when we were having these discussions, one thing that came to my mind was that there's a lot of progressive changes or positive updates from your side. So perhaps you could update us on more generally in the region and maybe touch on some specific countries as to the changes that have happened in the last 12 months or so, if that's okay.
That's correct. Yeah, then geopolitical situation and global elections definitely had a major impact on global mobility trends worldwide. We have noticed a shift in global mobility trends where long-term overseas assignment became less common and less frequent, and short-term, especially regional moves, became very popular. Urgent forced moves that marked 2022 and 2023 were not that frequent in 2024, which allow regular approach and more time to plan global mobility movement for the companies. Also, what was marked by in 2024, many governments recognized need to speed up and streamline immigration procedures. And this is general trend on Balkan countries especially and ex-Yugoslavia, as they want to attract more labor forces and to attract more foreign investments. So many governments, I would say, especially in Serbia, in Romania, also a couple of years ago it happened in Albania, and just recently in Croatia, streamline immigration process, and just for the purpose of attracting more foreign workers to come to the country. And these changes were not only done for the purpose of increasing efficiency, but also for addressing labor shortages and to help employers to attract and also retain foreign talents. I will just quickly touch on the changes that happened just recently in Croatia, since we are here. So some general trend is that validity of the permits is increased.
Right.
It was across, let's say, Balkan countries, it was always 1 year, and now it's increased to, for example, in Croatia, blue card is now valid for 4 years, compared to previously 2 years. Digital nomad visa is valid now 18 months instead of 12 months.
Yeah.
So foreigners can also qualify for a blue card based on experience and not only based on based on diploma, which was the case previously. Also, permit allows changing the employer, also allows self-employment, so it's more flexible for the foreigners, but also it's better for the employers as they struggle with the workforce here in Balkan region.
Thanks, Natasha. I'm conscious of time. We move on to our next topic, but I do want to stay with you. And you mentioned the digital nomad visa, and one topic that we seem to be hearing, and we've been hearing now for the last couple of years, is this digitisation of immigration. And specifically this year, we had obviously the ETA in the UK and lots more countries issuing electronic travel authorizations as well. We have Australia and Canada, many countries in Africa now. Also, Andreas said they've announced these. But looking back a bit, I believe this trend of digitization began or really kicked off around 5 years ago. It was Estonia, I believe, in June 2020, and then actually Croatia, January 2021, that announced these digital nomad visas. In my opinion, there are countries that have announced it since: Spain, Portugal, Brazil, etc. Some countries have been more successful, others less so, but I believe that digitization hasn't actually taken off as much as we thought it would be for digital nomad visas, more so with e-visas and electronic travel authorizations. But really curious to know across the regions, and maybe starting with you, Natasha, what impact has digitization had on immigration processes on some of the countries that you've covered?
Digitalization definitely has a major impact on immigration processes across the region, as it makes the process more efficient, faster, and more secure. Also across Central and Eastern Europe, e-visas, biometric permits, online portals, online applications are becoming standard, and they are replacing paper application, paper documents. Previously, I remember we had to submit that bunch of documents and now everything is online. I'll just mention an example of my country, Serbia, who last year in February 2024 almost completely switched to digital process for the entire immigration. So now single permit, residence permit, C visas, D visa, they're all obtained online through government portal. There is also option to submit application from abroad, which wasn't previously the case. And all these efforts show government willingness to attract more workers and more foreigners in the country. So we now have a single permit, which is biometric document. All details can be changed in the chip. You don't have to change the permit if you change employer. So a lot of flexibility, and the process is, let's say, easier and much faster.
So it really seems to be fitting in and moving quite forward in the region.
Yes.
And Marut, maybe if you can add to that, I'm curious to know what the situation is in terms of digitization in India.
India used to be extremely archaic, and if anyone's been to a local FRRO office, you'd be shocked to see just stacks of paper and probably everyone's data, and no one knows what they do with it. So when they did introduce some form of digitization, it was great. And India has this huge drive to digitize across not just immigration, but across corporate, across all sectors, and it's been fantastic in terms of one centralized system for applications. However, we're not fully there. So we have e-visas, so you can get an e-visa, which is a fully electronic process. You don't have to go submit your passport or any documents. It's an online process for tourism, business, conference, medical attendance as well. We've just introduced the student e-visa as well. And where the consular process is, it's a little bit of both. So you have to complete the application online, but you still need to do the physical submission, especially for things like a film visa, or if you want a longer term business visa than what you get in the e-visa, or for example, your employment visa. That has not been digitized completely. But the drive from India to digitize things, to cut out a lot of the red tape, it's been huge. And it's been received extremely positively, both by individuals as well as corporates. So you don't have to you can literally get an e-visa, which is an online visa, in 72 hours.
Wow.
They say 72 hours, but it comes within 24 hours to 48 hours. So if you have a last minute business trip, you don't have to worry, oh my God, what am I going to do about a visa? And an even better plus point through experience, I know, that you can even get it issued on a Saturday, which is, if you're lucky and you're really last minute, you might just get it in before your Sunday travel. So it's been really positive in that realm.
So positive steps as well.
Absolutely.
But when we were planning this discussion, it was interesting to see the contrast between different countries, and maybe Ben will touch on the situation in Germany, where it's been a bit more challenging to integrate digitization.
Yes, definitely. I mean, Germany is very slow on that topic, but they're doing baby steps, and it's definitely going to the right direction. But yeah, we need still to improve. But major change was like last year in April, May, Because when you would like to have the blue card, you need to show that your university degree and your university are recognized. So they have a database called Annabin, and this was always like a process where you needed to submit it by post, yeah, by your paper documents, the application. This has been digitized. You can do it online. Previously, the process time was 2 to 4 weeks after you submitted it, excluding, of course, the way the process needs to get to Germany. So this is now fully digital, and now you can get it within 3 to 8 working days. It depends, of course, can sometimes be longer. But also, since a few months in Germany, we have kind of an online system where you can do a pre-check for the consular process. Yeah? So can you upload your documents, and the embassy will, or the consulate will screen the documents and already in advance say to you, okay, it's fine, everything's perfect. Just come to the appointment, it's happening on this and that date. So you go there and you know already that your visa is, so to say, approved. So which is great for the talent, because in the past, of course, you need to submit the paper documents. Maybe you forgot something or you got rejected. Now I think it's a peace of mind for the individual, especially because they can just be relaxed, go there, and also has a great impact because depending on the location where you are located, there were like waiting times, like crazy waiting times, up to 6 months or even more. And you were just waiting for your appointment. Nowadays, with the new system, of course, not all countries are covered yet, and not all the different immigration categories as well, but you have usually the pre-check result within a week or 2.
So it's moving forward, but maybe a bit more slow compared to other countries. One of the things I found interesting in my career working in global mobility is the difference between perception and reality. And I think when it comes to perception, the United States is obviously so far advanced when it comes to technology, and you would imagine when it comes to immigration processing and digitization, it would also be quite far advanced. But when we spoke, Bobby, you kind of said that it's slightly a different picture and the reality is maybe actually different, and maybe you can elaborate a bit more on that if that's okay.
Yeah, the life of an immigration attorney in the U.S. is preparing these petitions that, especially now in a time where petitions might be scrutinized, are hundreds of pages, maybe of some supporting documents and letters and all the forms, and they are all printed out and they are signed, oftentimes original wet signatures, and actually put into an envelope and mailed off to the U.S. government and the USCIS, who adjudicates it. So we are fairly archaic from a procedural standpoint. Again, maybe some baby steps. There's a popular visa category called the H-1B visa, and over the last few years, they've actually started to integrate some technology which allows for the registration process for that lottery to actually be filled out on an online form. Now, if you're selected for the lottery, some of that information will pre-populate on the forms that then need to be submitted on the second half of the portion. So we do see some baby steps, and obviously we have an electronic system for travel authorization, ESTA. People that are applying for visas at the consulates use a DS-160 form online. So we do have some elements of it, but so we're pretty off from a procedural standpoint. But I think it's interesting to just note out from an enforcement standpoint, one of the things we're seeing is the use of technology and digital, and in the U.S. in particular, we talked about those executive orders concentrating and kind of broadly based, giving these directives to entry border officials of vet individuals coming through with high scrutiny. Well, now they're looking at social media accounts, they're looking at things like LinkedIn, they're looking at information. It's really an important topic as people are traveling into the U.S., that your digital footprint may very much be vetted, analyzed, reviewed, to the point that we're suggesting people bring different phones and different computers with them when they travel to the U.S. So procedurally, we're pretty far behind, but in an enforcement standpoint, digital enforcement is a reality.
Sure, I just want to touch on that. I did a webinar last week, and I feel I can be a bit more open with this audience because I know many of you, but I was shocked to hear that people writing things on their social media can revoke their visas or have them not able to enter the US. And that's what you're trying to say.
That's what they're utilizing. Students also that maybe have been part of some conversation on campus, or they are trying to find them and they are trying to revoke their visas, but also happening at the border. And one of the things that's interesting in the U.S. is that the border officials have a lot of search and seizure rights, even more so than law enforcement in the United States. So it doesn't mean that you have to give up that information, but if you don't give up that information and you don't allow them to inspect your computer, inspect your phone that you have with you, well, most likely you're not going to be able to get into the country. So yeah, absolutely, they are looking at that.
Great. We are going to move on to the next topic, but I do think the takeaway for the audience from this section is we have this assumption that the bigger, more economically powerful countries like France, Germany, and Spain are always the most advanced, they're always the quickest, but actually, if you look at the reality, it's countries like Estonia, Croatia, Eastern European countries, and other countries around the world as well, smaller countries that may be a bit more agile, that can come up with better, faster, more innovative procedures. And I do think the audience should think about that, and take away and consider that when they're looking at potential destinations and advising clients. So I will move on, though. I have this timer right in front of me. I'm starting to sweat now. We want to move on in terms of government relations. We've done a slider. I don't know if some of you have had the chance to read it, but if you could perhaps just take a quick look at that in terms of government policies on immigration laws for skilled workers, and what you think, keen to know what you think about what change there'll be over the next 5 years. So option 1, do you think the policies will become stricter with increased focus on compliance and regulation? 2, will it become more lenient with expanded pathways? Or 3, policies will remain largely the same with only minor changes? Keen to know what you think. Ooh, interesting. It's pretty equal. Well, not many of you think that policies become more lenient, but a bit of change in the vote. It's exciting. I think the majority think things will either stay the same or get stricter. I think that's the main takeaway. And it seems to be the flavour of, if you look at Germany, if you look at some of the countries in Europe, the US, of course, it seems to be how things are going. But with that in mind, one of the thoughts I've had, in my opinion, it's just my opinion, is that, if you look at the EU, you have directives and initiatives like the EU Blue Card, the EU ICT permit, the ETIAS. Maybe in my lifetime it will finally be implemented. I very much doubt it. But what I'm seeing from my perspective, is more and more countries having bilateral agreements with other countries and saying, it's just going to take too long to have EU-wide or African-wide agreements, so let's form agreements with other countries. And with that in mind, I'm keen to know whether any of my panelists have got experience in that. And I think, Maruk, we'll go to you for a quick rundown in terms of what's going on in India.
So there are bilateral agreements, and a lot of the time people don't know that these even exist, to be fair, because they're so subdued. They're not in the core of immigration, so they don't really stick out. But there is what they call a common, let me get this right, common agenda on migration and mobility. So it's a CAM agreement,
right,
which has been signed between India and the EU in 2016. So EU as the European Union as a whole. And I think the common goal there is to ensure removal of any undocumented people and to kind of facilitate entry in terms of employment, to kind of facilitate agreements and relations between the EU region and India. And there are individual agreements as well with Australia, New Zealand, UK, US. Individual agreements as well, in addition to CAM, with Germany, with France, etc. But we do have the CAM agreement with the EU as a whole as well. And it's a general idea, as opposed to more stringent rules and regulations, in terms of mutual harmony between the regions in terms of movement of people.
Interesting. Thanks, Maruk. Ben, you mentioned some interesting agreements in Germany. Keen to hear a bit more about that.
Yes, of course, Germany also has agreements with different countries, also with India, as you said. But just wanted to give you one example about Brazil, for example, because Germany is, of course, seeking for different talents in different sectors, like care sector, medical sector. And they have an agreement with Brazil for care workers. So the goal was to have at least 700 people coming to Germany from Brazil, but between April 22 and April 24, only 256, I think this is the right number, came to Germany. So it's also failing. Of course, they're trying to set this agreements in place with Brazil or India and other countries, of course. But of course, I think it has different factors, of course. Germany might be less attractive. The language is a huge topic. Also salary, depending on where you live. Housing market is very tight. So the different factors coming into place. But of course, I think we will more and more see this kind of agreements to create processes, agreements, relationships with countries to have like an easy, smooth transition from A to B.
Interesting. And how, I mean, actually for the entire panel, like if you have any comments, but do you think this will affect your day job in terms of filing applications? Because it's more complicated than looking at EU-wide law when you're looking at this agreement, that agreement, this agreement. Will it make your day jobs more difficult as immigration practitioners?
From an India perspective, I don't think so. So from a business,
Yeah.
excuse me, from a business immigration perspective, I don't think so, because I think the mutual ground is the facilitation of movement and the ease of, easing the whole requirement of moving people between countries. But I just want to actually point out about tariffs. Do they have, so where do we draw the line with politics, with immigration, with trade deals, with tariffs? And I don't know, a lot of you would have probably seen in the news that there was I don't know if it was a rumor, whether it happened, probably you might be able to, it was an India-US thing. And when Trump was enforcing his tariffs all over the world, one of the things that happened between India and the US was a huge number of undocumented foreign nationals were deported and returned to India, over 114 of them, I believe, by military escort. And that was done in response to India not being faced with extremely high tariffs. So do we know between that corridor if there's going to be a direct relation between that? And how is it going to impact, or how are you going to calculate it? I mean, it's something, I mean, from the India perspective, we know that it's happened. And we know that now there is a tariff imposed of 26%. But is that going to still stand? Is it going to be imposed? How much more of a repercussion is it going to have on immigration?
Yeah. Again, we have until like 8 p.m. tonight, right, to discuss this. That'll be what the workshop is for. Well, I think the one thing that's very clear in this, kind of chaotic or, new reality from the U.S. Trade dealing perspective is that everything is a negotiation. So that will be interesting from a day-to-day perspective of U.S. lawyers and people that run U.S. programs to understand how is visa going to fit into that trade negotiation. So, from a U.S. perspective, we do not have a lot of, necessarily bilateral agreements as it results around immigration. Relatively speaking, we have the USMCA, which is previously known as NAFTA, between Mexico, the U.S., and Canada. That'll be up and most likely starting renegotiations in 2026. We have a TN visa that is certainly going to probably be a part of those discussions. So again, it's a little bit of a wait and see. I think it'll be interesting next year at this time having this conversation to kind of see, okay, was immigration utilized as part of these trade negotiations. I will say, though, you're right in terms of enforcement or getting their way or asserting their will. Anecdotally, one of the things that we heard was similar situation with Colombia. First few days or weeks of Trump's administration, deporting, sending a plane from the U.S. to Colombia, Colombia not accepting that plane, and immediately a stop of issuing visas at the U.S. Embassy in Colombia. So they're definitely, I think, going to utilize the power of immigration and visas to try to assert their will. And so from a day-to-day perspective, we'll be monitoring this for the next 3.5 years.
On an hourly basis, I suspect.
Yeah.
Natasha, just because of the different range of countries that you cover, there are a number of really fascinating agreements taking place in Eastern Europe. Would you care to kind of elaborate on those a bit more?
Yes, definitely. I would again touch on my country, Serbia. Serbia inherited many bilateral agreements from ex-Yugoslavia, And after the breakup of ex-Yugoslavia, Serbia as a legal successor took over all obligations, including bilateral agreements that are concerning work permits, immigration, movement of labor, and also social security. I would say that according to the new regulation from last year, these agreements do not play a major role in the immigration. However, they were applicable according to the previous law. But on the other side, Serbia is not part of EU, but we try to build strong ties with the neighboring country. And one example is, for example, Open Balkan Initiative, which is agreement signed by North Macedonia, Serbia, and Albania, which allows free movement of the goods and labor across these three countries. So the permit, Open Balkan permit, is very easy to get, just based on ID card of, and probably answering a couple of questions. And applicants of any of these three countries can work in other two just based on this permit, which is called Open Balkan permit.
Interesting. So there's those relationships at the more with the neighbouring countries, which has
like
been helpful.
Connections.
Great. Thanks, Natasha. We are coming towards the end of the panel, and any questions, please do let us know, but we'll have some time for that at the end if any of you have any. But moving on to the last section in terms of practical takeaways, what can you actually go home and implement in your day jobs and think about in terms of strategy and planning? And I want to start with you, Bobby, because you have a really interesting role. You are our panelists working from within an RMC, advising on what the situation is. What would you say are the heightened sensitive issues for mobility professionals generally, especially in the audience, that you would recommend giving some advice on in terms of takeaways and
Yeah. So all of us, suppliers that are working with these mobility teams, and I think the one thing to keep in mind is empathy. U.S. immigration over the next several years is obviously transactional, but it's less and less transactional and more about the individual and the circumstances. As I mentioned, there's a lot of moving parts right now. There's a lot of uncertainty. So having that empathetic view from a supplier standpoint to certainly understand that they need to understand that they might need some extra hand-holding. I think that's important. And then quickly, I will just say, in the scope of the overall relocation, could we see from a U.S. perspective or even globally, right, like that hesitation or that uncertainty, does that cause a hiccup in the overall life cycle of the relocation? So do we have to monitor that, and do we have to maintain expectations for delivering the other relocation services, because immigration is a little bit more of, again, less of a just black and white transaction and a little bit more of a individual strategized, stepping stone to the process.
Thanks, Bobby. Appreciate that. Natasha, with you.
Yeah, basically in terms of, let's say, takeaway from this session, I would say that partnership with immigration authorities is most important. We try to build strong connections with the authorities, and we believe that our goal is that they see us as a partners, not the other side, someone who really helps them complete the job. So we understand their requirements, and I think that's the main thing. And also, of course, proper communication among all stakeholders. So it's with HR teams, employees, RMCs, all who are included in this process.
Absolutely. It's about connecting the dots, because I think we
are in the middle, just connecting everything.
I don't know how many people in the audience adjust to immigration, but there is that feeling that we are slightly separated sometimes, and working together with the relocation side, the tax side, and collaborating as much as possible is a really important point. Maruk, what would you say in terms of practical steps and considerations for the audience to go home and think about?
Time and planning. And I follow a process of planning, strategy, execution, implementation, and execution.
Right.
And I noticed that clients usually follow it the other way around. So it's execution and then, oh my God, what's happened? So it's always, time is just the most important thing, and planning, because if anyone's worked with India anywhere in the world, you'll know every embassy or consulate around the world has different requirements. Even in the same country, two different consulates have different requirements. Anywhere you get stuck, time. So if you got time and managing a client's expectations, so communication is key. If you communicate, 9 out of 10 clients will be accommodating and understanding. If you don't communicate, you've got a big, big problem on your hands. So time and communication.
Thanks, Marik. Ben?
Nothing left for me, right? No, but I fully agree with everyone here. One thing what hasn't been mentioned is, of course, efficiency, technology. Yeah, time is also a time factor, of course. But I think nowadays you cannot work without the technology anymore. Of course, I know there's still some companies on the market which might not use technology until a certain way, of course. But I think, we need to offer the clients also a technological solution to be more efficient, also to save time. Filling up forms, for example, having an overview where you are in the process and so on, which is beneficial for everyone, right?
Yeah, I think it's so true. It's so important. And I feel like you've captured the whole spectrum. We've got time, Marik, collaboration and partnerships. I think really important, the idea that we absolutely need to deliver a human service, but with technology at the center of everything we do, because technology is so integral to global mobility. I will also give an answer closely connected to empathy, but I think, in my opinion, emotional intelligence and the ability to put ourselves in the shoes of the people we work alongside, the HR mobility professionals that we work with, and the assignees that are actually moving from one country to another. Whether we like it or not, this is a very human and personal industry, and it will continue to be that way, and we need to be able to adapt and understand that this is all about people, people, people. Yeah. With that said, the light is flashing red, just an extra time, but we do have a few minutes in case anyone has any questions. But thank you to my panelists. I thought you were really great, so thank you so much.
Thank you.